and Daddy and his wife to live in the one farmhouse over on the road. Mother would have nothing of that. Your grandmother would have none of that. So the wedding was actually delayed about a year until they could get their house built.
I never knew that.
I didn't either.
Now, there's a humorous part to some of this. When we moved from that home up to Paradise, we had a beehive out in the front yard. And a little girl named Wilma, about 3.5 years old, went exploring one day when they were keeping the kids busy while they were loading furniture in the wagon to go up to Paradise. She crawled up on the top of the beehive, and that made the bees very unhappy.
Oh, she got stung.
And she got stung, and she got stung, and all kinds of stuff. They, as they tell about later, they pulled down her panties and showed her little bottom, and then took tweezers and pulled the stingers out.
I wonder if she remembers that.
Well,
Yeah,
yes, she remembers it.
They've talked about it so much.
Yeah. But that happened the day we moved, because there were 3 or 4 wagons there, and they were loading up with furniture and all of the things that we needed up at the new house.
That's great.
That did that.
You've told me in the past about going to school. It was
Okay, now, good. As we were going west on this Route 92, we went by Ectonville, you go on down to make the right turn to go to the farm where I was born. If you had continued on toward that about 2.5 miles, you would come to the Woods School, where I went to school. My first year and half of the second year at this country school. 1 room, 8 classes, 2 outhouses, 2 hitching posts, hitching to tie up the horses. Some kids rode their horses to school with a bag of feed and straw on their back, and then on the back of the horse. And when they got into school, they took them down, they staked them out, and then when lunchtime came, they pumped them and gave them water and feed. Now they were doing a little bit of work, so they got some oats, which is prize food for a horse. And that's so that the kids could drive the horse home.
But you walked.
I walked. We never could get the horse to come back home. It would have taken me to school all right, but who they going to get the horse home? They had to have it during the day. Mother used it. His name was Gib.
You had 1 horse.
Well, that was another horse. Dad had some horses that were out in the field, plowing, and work horses. This was a social horse, if you want to call it that way. Peppy.
This is like during World War I, right? In that time frame?
Yeah. And see, I was on the farm during the war. Daddy got his call the week before the armistice was signed. He was actually on his way to Liberty to be taken off when they got the word about the armistice.
So the reason they held off so long on getting him is because he's a farmer, is that right?
Yeah.
Farmers had a deferment?
Yes. Somebody had to feed the country.
Wasn't that property where the school was, your family's?
No, not that. That's a different school. That's a school up there, Grandpa Dale's place up the road. But I went to the 1st grade at the Woods School.
How far did you go?
Which was about 3.5, 4 miles from Smithville. And I had about 2 miles to go to get to school. I was actually in another school district, but we did all of our trading at Smithville. So they got me in a school district right next to ours, but I was another mile away from home. I can remember going to pie suppers at the school where the teachers would bake their pies or cakes like that, put them out on a table like that, and then the people would bid on them. And if you bid on the lunches, food like that, and you got to take it, and the madam school teacher often sit down and have your picnic lunch. Don't worry, a lot of the teachers, not all of them. Miss Nell Wood was my first teacher, and she had all 8 grades.
One teacher in that classroom?
One teacher in the classroom. Well, maybe there was only 20 kids, so.
With 8 grades?
With 8 grades. When we came back from Albuquerque, about 6 years later, she was in teaching in the Smithfield school system. Miss Nellwood came from down in the country into the school system in,
okay.
In
you just said something. I
Smithfield.
want to ask a question. You just said when we came back from Albuquerque. Okay, when did you go to Albuquerque and why?
We went to Albuquerque in February of 1919.
Right after the war. Okay.
Right.
Because of your.
Why did we go? My mother had TB. They didn't expect her to live.
Okay.
We took her off the train on a stretcher.
I never knew that. And Albuquerque was better because it was dry.
Well, high and dry.
They had sanitariums there.
And they had what was then Edith, it was then Central Avenue from downtown all the way up to where the university now is. The university used to be out in the country. But there was when we got there, Daddy knew how to farm, and that was it. And there was the only work there was at the Santa Fe Railway Roundhouse. So he got a job there, the lowest paying job they had, but at least he had a job. And we lived in this little house, smaller than this apartment. And there was Wilma and me. I've shown you these pictures of us at the truck with the fez. Daddy wearing his fez. You got it in your pile of papers.
I think so.
With his Shriner's outfit on. He was a Shriner. And this was taken, he was getting ready to go down to get on the train to go to the annual convention. And they took a picture of it in front of our house. Daddy and Mother and Wilma and me. And this was probably 1922, 1923.
Well, when did he have a gas station? Did he have
Well, this is afterwards when we were in Columbia.
So in Albuquerque, he worked for the Santa Fe Railroad at the...
And then he and a fellow named Fay Brown went into business, the trucking business. And most of their business was hauling trunks from the depot to the sanitariums.
You didn't tell about the sanitariums. You started to, along
That
the
was
central.
where most of their business came from, and down to the railroad. And it was to haul the trunks for the people who were coming out there for their health.
You say sanitariums, plural. There's a lot of them?
Oh yes, they had the whole street lined with them, and the reason what they were different was that people were supposed to get plenty of fresh air at a high altitude where it would be, well,
a lot of sunshine.
they had a lot of, I don't know what you'd call them. What they were was just a platform, and on a building that was probably 10 feet square. And the people lived there. They took their meals in the dining room. They were part of the sanitarium, but they were supposed to live out there. And they were plywood up 4 feet in the wall, and then canvas went on up to the 8 feet, and then it peaked in to the top. And a lot of the people came out and slept in those things for 2 or 3 years, were cured, and went back home.
But people came from all over the country,
all
too.
over the country.
That's where you went to get cured of TB.
That's right.
And your mother was obviously cured because she lived for
That's right.
her whole age.
For another 45 years.
Well, how many years were you in Albuquerque?
We got there in January of 1919. And we left there in June of I think about 1925, 24, 25. We were there about 5, 6 years.
And that's what cured your mother?
That cured my mother.
Interesting.
In the meantime, Daddy and this other fellow, Fay Brown, they were running the trucking. They were doing this hauling. They also made trips. Oh, Daddy had an Oldsmobile truck with the gas tank across the inside of the dashboard. You didn't have windows you rolled, you had a curtain that you put up when it rained. The tire was 35 by 5.
Okay.
So it was a truck tire.
Yeah.
An Oldsmobile truck, 4 cylinders. And they used to make trucks, runs. They would go up to Cuba. You've been there. They'd go down to Mountain Air, which is where the church camp was, but I was nothing. You went down the east side of the mountain. You come back up through Lynn and Lycan back into Albuquerque that way.
Is this like a 1-ton truck or something bigger than that?
No, that's big enough.
Like today would be a very large pickup or something.
It would be a very small pickup.
Okay.
Tell about your trip with your dad.
I went with Dad one time up to Cuba and to Cabezon and one of the Star Lake. Well, this is in the summertime now. Out of school. I rode over and he had a load of merchandise and those things I thought like that. And I did. You didn't follow roads, you followed an Indian trail or the mail or the same route that the postman did. Yeah, he made one trip a week from Albuquerque in a car, truck type thing, in a car up to Bernalillo, across the river and go over and follow the road. We said we followed an Indian trail. You did, and you had a lot of Mexican sheep herders and like that. And we went up and made the delivery to, I can't think of the name of the town. I went over and spent the night in Cuba. Then the next day we loaded up with stuff to come back to town. Wool mostly because there was a lot of sheep farming up into there.
How many miles was that from like downtown?
Oh, downtown Albuquerque is about 85 miles.
So that's an all-day trip on that kind of road.
So we started back. This is maybe dark. And we went along and it started to snow. This is July now. But we're up at 8,000 feet, so I mean, we're not fooling around. It started to snow. And Dad was following this Indian trail, I think. He stopped and he says, I think we'll spend the night here. So he had a lot of canvas that he used to tie things down for. So and the sidewalls on the truck, the picture part of it, were this high, something like that. So we spread the tarpaulin over both of them and down the sides and lashed them on, so we had a top. And the bales of wool were not too big, so we moved those around so we could sleep, and we had our coats and things like that, and we slept there all night.
And the wool was probably pretty soft.
And got up the next morning and Daddy walked right straight ahead. And less than 100 feet away was a 1,000-foot drop. Of course, if we kept on going the night before, he'd still be looking for us. But we did that. So we went on, we hadn't anything to eat now.
Where'd you go on to? How did that
Well,
drop?
we were heading back towards Albuquerque.
Yeah, but you said there was a drop
Well, there was a bluff.
over the side.
We were up at the top of the bluff, and this drop off was just right straight down, was 1,000 feet. But you could go up and down it by using switchback tracks like that. Well, as we went out the next morning, no food, I mean, drink some water. We went on down this Indian trail, a mail trail, And we came to a slope thing, and there was a bunch of sheep and goats and a tender's cabin, curling smoke out of it like that. And we hollered at them, make sure they know, let us know who we were. And like, and we got into talking to them and something like that. We kept motioning for some food. And they brought us some goat's milk. Now, I had never drank any before. I don't think I've drank any since. But I drank 2 big cups of goat's milk. Daddy drank 1. Daddy got ready to pay him for it. And they spoke no English and we spoke no Spanish. So Daddy held his hand out. First of all, he offered them 3 nickels. No, he offered them a dime and a nickel. That was for three cups. That's the man, we asked him mucho how much, he held up 3 fingers. Okay, so he gave him a dime and a nickel. He didn't want that, he wanted 3. So Daddy took it back and gave him 3 nickels. And I was satisfied, because he got 1 coin for each one of his goats.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it?
That's right. And so we got the milk, that's all. The goat's milk, and I drank it. He had just come from stripping it too.
Warm milk.
Any kind of milk. And,
You were hungry.
yeah, and see, the snow was still on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we started out and headed for Bernalillo, which is the place where you cross the river to come in. And we came along and we met the postman. Mail carrier was on his way out to the mountains.
Was he in a car?
He was in a truck, because he was also hauling freight.
Mm-hmm.
But he had to make that run every week. That's where you get your rural mail carrier. You know, RFD. Well, see, those people, just like us and everybody else, had free mail. I mean, they had to furnish a mail service to them.
But once a week, not once a day?
No, well, probably we wouldn't get a dozen letters in a month. But anyhow, we did that and we came on back home. But I didn't really realize what kind of a deal we slept in that night. With all that stuff right straight ahead of us. No deviation, right straight ahead of us. Of course, that's where the road went, except that just before you got there, you started on your zigzag going back and forth to get down to the bottom.
You wouldn't see that in the dark. You couldn't see it for the snow.
That's right.
One thing you've mentioned a number of times, and that is the road going up Sandia. You mentioned that your father helped build that road.
That's right. The road up to the crest.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that was one of the last jobs Daddy had here in town. And they came home once a week, Saturday night.
But what did he drive a machine?
Look, it took him half a day to get home.
Yeah.
Because you did everything by hand, scooping the dirt and the dust and stuff like that around. You moved it all with horses and plows, and the bucket that picked up the rocks and gravel and stuff like that, taken over and put them in to help fill in so that the road flow around.
Is that what he did? Was he labor moving that stuff?
He was the boss of the destruction gang, and construction gang. And see, he had been a farmer. He knew how to handle horses.
Oh, yeah.
And he was smart on that. He would work them and then let them rest. And then work them and let them